Chapter 38 Wave 3
Tiamat, God of suffering, soul sucker of Nalata, bane of existence, we have bested your fiendish minions and slain your repulsive general. Now we stand 5,000 strong at your undeserving and ill-gotten doorstep. Each of us prepared to die. Each of us steadied by resolve. Each of us teeming with angst to be the first to send your head spinning across Uma's air and plummeting upon her soil.
Eviar spews his compliments, gloats, and threats from just outside the once vibrant city. Behind and around him, the field is littered with corpses belonging to both of the opposing factions. He does not wish to defile Nalarta any further than it already has been, and thus he coaxes the god to come out. If I had to venture a reason for his doing so outside of the respect he held for his now late rival, I could not. The Tamas are tough, Eviar especially so. And yet, I felt what he felt when I had told him of Yindra's sacrifice. There was no physical display of emotion, nor any hint from his frame and posture suggesting that he felt anything at all. I just knew. I knew at that moment that the war had become personal for him. Yindra was calcified as one of the few pillars of purpose for him. Now that pillar is dust. I could not imagine to what measure of nihilism Eviar would be crushed beneath if the remaining columns of his life were to fall. 2/3 of the army gave their lives to reach this stage. It appears that what remains is largely formed by units purposed for the third wave. Eviar's predictions were accurate and his strategy is proving true. If not for conservation, for triumph. I cannot say that I would have deployed similar methods. But I am not an experienced general. Nor do I wish or aspire to become one. It is cold. Unreasonably so. And out of nowhere. Yes, exactly that. Like the cold of nowhere. The cold of a void, of absence, of emptiness. The lacking abyss. It came so abruptly and with no wind to bring it. He's here. He's come to answer Eviar's challenge. Small, unsettled stones and pebbles skip and fall from the ledge of the high city walls from where the pale god appears all the way down to the surface before us all. The army traced the slipping rocks with their eyes and nods. All but Eviar, Rilindur, Gravata, and the other Alpha General, who I am yet to be acquainted with, did thus. We kept our glares fixated on the threat. Something compelled the rest of the army to avoid eye contact. Fear? Not seconds ago they were exuding abundant rage, courage, and triumph. Damn it! It is not as though I do not want to look away myself. When staring at him with my real eyes, I can see his suffering. Not in the same manner that I felt Eviar's guilt and grief of loss. It is not pity that I feel for him, but rather pity I feel from him. There is a sense of danger to it, a chaotic pity. A furious and false virtue that cannot naturally be satisfied, unlike the pity that arises from love. This is the pity of a longing to help that which cannot be helped and does not want it. Not from him, in the very least. He is as an emperor who forces his way upon his subjects, despite their indifference and personal wishes. He believes he knows best, and not just that he knows best, but that he knows the only way forward. A self-perceived and self-anointed complete knowledge. A tragedy of sheer intent with a tainted course to fulfill it. A well-meaning peril. There are contradictions galore for the being that is Tiamatu. I could spend years dissecting the philosophy of the deity before us without so much as him uttering a word. His presence speaks for itself, and it speaks volumes. Tiamatu steps over the rim and stands on the thin air as though there were no ledge at all, his terrific glare scanning below. Suddenly, he falls at a velocity that demonstrates that his weight is that of a small house. Plumes of dust and surface debris spray from his point of impact in all directions. Eviar casually and lethargically whips his sword as an indication for the army to charge, but he himself does not move. In both waves, he was at the forefront for the entire duration of the battle. Odd. But even odder is that the army will not budge. Eviar turns to face them.
Are you more afraid of him than you are of me?
Huffing savagely through his nostrils, the Tamas general thrusts his blade into the nearest raider's skull, then retracts it slowly. His breathing calms, then he continues.
Fools! You are under his spell. Reignite yourselves and set ablaze the fear that he has instilled in you. Burn it to an ash, for you have no use of it.
His shouting coated with the drool of rage. The weight of Yndra's death begins to foment through him. This is the savagery of the Tamas that I willfully blinded myself to. To so carelessly make an example of one's life like that is something I cannot bring myself to comprehend nor condone. Why? Barbaric impulse? Cultural tendency? A byproduct of ire? If any of these, which is it? Or perhaps it is the amalgamation of them all. Nevertheless, it ought to be restrained. After a moment, the culprit of his decision makes itself known as the corpse of his example squirms and a blue hue from his eyes, unlike those of Tiamatu's, fades. A ball fly, an invasive creature of the night, flies from the cadaver's ear and is swiftly cut by Wolfbane. The pale god must have cast his control over him, and Eviar was privy to the intruder in their midst. Unsurprisingly, the first to cheer furiously are the raiders, even after he had made a precedent in executing one of them. The wolves join in with an observable unease. I can sense that they are rather uncomfortable that Eviar now leads the army alone since Yndra is gone. The alphas are mostly pack-dominant, and they are not experienced in leading armies. And there aren't many alpha generals who specialize in such matters. Even Yndra did not ascend to that status until the onset of this war and by request of the king. Though he may have denied himself the honor in the past, as of recent, he took it upon himself as an obligation that he could no longer deny. Expressly, since one of his students is at the center of this pandemonium. Gurvata and the other Alpha General may be the only Omani leaders who survived the original encounter with the Pale God. Yet, despite this and their rightful authority to do so, they, too, will not take the helm. Notwithstanding that the Alpha Generals do not cheerfully admire it, Eviar is the most suitable to conduct an army, and thus they cede their command to him. The third wave descends upon Tiamatu. Vehement and dedicated roars color and fill the air. Relindur motions for me to stay put, and he does thus himself. Being situated in the far back of the army does not bode well with me, but joining in now would only present opportunities of collateral damage. I cannot fight in a fray with so many others. It is far too disorganized. The morbid god clashes with the first unfortunate wolf, running his foot to his chest and stomping the poor initiator into the ground. Tiamatu grabs hold of two more assailing fighters by their throats and slams them into an early grave. He bursts into our ranks, ripping through the army with his bare hands. Fire, water, ice, lightning, toxicities and poisons, swords and hammers, fists and kicks, arrows and spears. Any and all mediums of attack are thwarted by the god's transcendent melee alone. One would believe him to be a god of war, and yet war is but a limb of suffering. In the span of a few fleeting and short, yet also somehow painfully long minutes, Tiamatu has crushed a quarter of our remnant forces. At any moment, I could have interfered and saved at least some of them. It would have been an accessible reality to me, but something held me accountably helpless. It was not Relindur. No. It is not my hesitancy of friendly fire, either. Have I, too, been captivated by the god's spell of fear and dismay? Or is there no such spell? Am I just simply afraid? Am I too terrified to confront my destiny and all the responsibility that goes along with it? Now? Here? After I've come so far? At this point? Never. I must not abandon my fate. I cannot. Too much thinking. Not enough observing. Soak in this mercurial and ever-changing canvas as it is without adulterating it by the ink of your mind. Relindur looks to me, sternly yet compassionately. You are shaking. But your time for action has not yet arrived. Be still and look. One would believe him to be thrice his age. His composure is as a lone and deeply entrenched boulder in a desert against the heat of the days and the chill of the nights, the flurry of the sandstorms and the trembling of quakes, unmoved and unbothered. However, it is even more impressive than that. A boulder has no internal struggle. Rielendor radiates destruction. Yet, as of late, he has chained misfortune itself to a post within him, and for many days now. A feat that I know is tremendously onerous for him.
Command! Spatial tuck!
Gravata teleports himself to Tiamatu, folding the space between them, then blinks out of sight, taking the immortal with him. They are high above us, nearly bridging the firmament. Gravata has a distinct signature, and thus I am able to trail him with my track command and Drakin's Eye. The space-bending Omanu general kicks off Tiamatu's chest and actuates another command.
Command! Down!
He motions his palm downward, and by some invisible force, the pale god is pulled back into Oma's crust with a meteoric impetus. His crash landing births a rumbling tsunami of rock and dust, consuming and enveloping the battlefield and blanketing it in a slow-falling storm of smut. The rest of the army pulls back as per Eviar's instruction. At the very least, a few of our own were sacrificed to that blow. It has become lucidly clear to the Tamas warmonger that only the most formidable of us can do battle with Tiamatu. Eviar himself, for the time being, will not interfere on the account that he yearns to demolish the god with his own hands. This is as a pronounced truth to me now. Be it by the warrior in him or the avenger, however, I cannot know for certain.
Command! Natural entanglement!
The other mysterious Alpha General makes his first move, summoning forth deep vines and broad roots from underneath the arid ground to snare the downed deity in place. The vines congeal and thicken into thorny branches, and the base of it into a sturdy trunk, swiftly molding around Tiamatu's frame and becoming one with the god. The supine tree contains the god. Wooden barbs grip his ribs as the bark matures into his skin, producing a living, grim, and ghastly piece of art upon the chalky moonlit battlefield. Between the sprawling vines and a mast of immensely augmented gravity, Tiamatu is pinned. Teleportation and control of gravity. With such abilities, Gravata is beyond admirable. This second Alpha General, however, is piquing my interest even further. Despite the weeks of sawless skies, he was able to bring forth living vegetation that has not been brittled by the extended duration of darkness. His is life-giving. The mother tree has endowed and blessed him dearly.
How long exactly do you believe these flaccid bindings can hold me?
Tiamatu, constrained and flattened to his stomach, mutters from under his breath and behind his teeth whilst pushing off and through the living shackles, rifting the trunk and successfully placing one foot solidly on the cratered ground. Then he positions the other. Finally, erecting his body straight and vertical against the prodigious odds imposed upon him, he says,
I've withstood greater hardships in my sleep. Command! Magnetic tethers!
Gravata generates and directs two space-arcing spheres with their own gravitational poles to each side of Tiamatu. His arms and legs spread to each sphere. The sallow invader is bound to his own position now by 3 gravitational poles, 4 when considering Oma's own. What's more, the vines and branches of the entangling tree grip him tightly once more. Gravata turns to face Eviar. They both nod to one another, confirming the next step to whichever strategy they seem to have devised together. Gravata teleports away. Moments later he has returned, situated atop the outer walls of the city, and with him is a glazed and finely constructed wooden ballista draped in the memorabilia and banner of the Zithori.
Payman!
Gravata shouts to the other Alpha General, then spins his 2 fingers in a stirring, rotating motion. So, that is his name. Payman rotates the pale god within his ever-growing sapling so that he may face Gravata and the shining spearhead of the ballista. Tiamatu chuckles at the sight, entirely unfazed. There exists no weight of fear, no angst in him. Fasima. She interrupts me before I can finish.
Yes, En. He's almost there. Nearly all of his power has returned to him.
Then why is it that he has not used any of it? He's been fighting with us with his brawn alone up until now. He displayed much wider capabilities when he first assaulted Nalarta. I posed this question to her.
It shames me that in all of my days of observing Alma and all worlds besides it, that I can only say that I am uncertain, and that this may be his first thrill since his duel with Parias. If my recollection of his battle with your ancestor holds true, at one point during their clash he had mentioned to Parias that for a brief instant that their bout had made him forget his own suffering.
So, he is looking to swap one pain for another. A distraction from the old by the new, leastwise temporarily. The magnificent horns of my ilk sound and tell of the king's arrival. The wolves of what's left of our unified military bow. The Tamas do not. As is expected, for he is not their monarch. However, they do stand at attention. Elementa is carried and guided in a brazen chariot of gold, marble, and the finest wood. The illustrious wagon is pulled by 2 heavily armored onyx. Even their tusks are brandished with wrapped metal plating and gilded decorative embroideries. Tiamatu raises his brow and chin in defiance of the persistent gravity to Elementa's arrival before him. The king dismounts and descends. He walks to and fro, side to side, and completely around the pale god in an impolite, impersonal observation. Tiamatu, the whole while, smirking confidently, tracing the king's walk with his piercing blue eyes. "You are quite the being, aren't you?" he rhetorically asks the captured deity.
Well, I am a god. It is to be expected that a mortal can only fathom a fraction of my sanctity.
That is not what I'd call it. Elementa crosses his arms.
What would you call it, your highness?
Tiamatu mocks him. Sanctity implies holiness. Holiness implies goodness. There is nothing good about you. The god of suffering bursts into laughter at Elementa's analysis.
There are 3 of us. The god of suffering, yours truly. The goddess of joy. And lastly, though he was first, the god of balance. And you believe holiness is reserved for the other 2 alone?
Tiamatu raises his eyebrow to Elementa, who is just as shocked as I am to hear confirmation of the other 2 gods. Just as shocked, but quicker to regain his placidity.
And do these other deities side with you, or are they with us?
Deep down, the king is wrestling his, and our, previous and blatant disregard for the old world, the texts of ancient and the histories that formed our civilizations. Though he has recently been made far more knowledgeable of them than most by the research of his scholars, he still garners and fosters doubts.
They are with you only on the basis that I am acting outside of the favor and approval of the first god. They will not save you. Conserve your pleas and waste not your prayers. None of us are to hamper with the lives of mortals. I am the only god who is willing to break his ridiculous mandates.
His? What sort of hierarchy does not instill punishment to those who break the laws? The king asks.
He works by obscure and mysterious means.
His smile fades from his countenance. The king, displeased with his answer, or lack thereof, nods, remounts his chariot, and rides towards us. Eviar raises his sword, then bringing it down, he shouts,
Release!
The tension of the skein evaporates as it uncoils, thrusting the massive metal bolt forward and through the sternum of the pale god, skewering him in place and solidifying his entrapment to an even greater extent.
He bleeds!
One of the Tamas raiders shouts as the god hacks and coughs out the very first token of his vulnerability.